It's late in the evening, I can see that radio light, and everybody gathers and everybody'd rather be together on a Saturday night. Coffee on the stove, a sweet potato pie, and everybody gathers and everybody'd rather be together on a Saturday night. Well, you are listening to Sean of the South, and I'm your host tonight, Sean Dietrich, coming to you from a cow pasture in northwest Florida. This episode brought to you by Case Knives, a tradition of my family dating back to my granddaddy, and also by my buddy Ron Taylor from WNC Original Music of the Carolinas. Ron Taylor scours the nation finding the best music that you've ever heard. Special guest tonight, the 2nd South Carolina String Band. Also, first date stories sent in to us from listeners all over this fine nation. You don't want to miss that, I promise you. Well, we appreciate you joining us on this wonderful Saturday night in the sleepy heart of northwest Florida. We are coming to you from a frozen cow field because we've had some weather this week. I mean, we have had some weather. Wherever you live right now, you ought to be grateful that you hadn't had the weather that the Panhandle has had. You know, we're notorious for weather. Weather is something that we suffer here in the Panhandle. You can wake up one morning, it'll be 90 degrees outside, humid, sunny, beautiful, with a Gulf breeze flying through the air and wetting your lips with salt water so that you can taste it in the back of your throat. And then 8 hours later, clouds will swarm in. It will unleash a deluge onto the world. The next morning you will wake up, it will be 30 degrees outside. There will be icicles coming from the noses of your cats, who cannot, for the life of themselves, go to the bathroom because everything is too frozen. Now, you think I'm kidding, but I'm telling you the absolute truth. It has been quite a week for weather. We had warm weather one day, and the next day, clouds swooped in so fast, big, fat, black Pillsbury Doughboy-looking clouds that gave everybody in our area an earache. They swooped in, and they unleashed more rain than we've had in a long time. Probably about, this is just a rough estimate, maybe about 4 feet. And after they left, 2 days of hard rain, hard, depressing, despondent rain, they left, and they left us with temperatures in the 30s. In the 30s. That's cold enough to make ice. That's cold enough to make your teeth chatter, even when your teeth are in the glass beside your bedside. Got a great show for you here. A great show for you. Brought to you by Midnight Shift Coffee, the official coffee of the Pensacola Police Department. $1 from each bag goes to benefit the Riley Foundation, which supports childhood cancer. Go visit midnightshiftcoffee.com. Also by Folklore Brewing and Meadery, quite literally the best brew in Alabama. And that's no joke. Visit folklorebrewingandmeadery.com. We asked people this week to send us their first date stories because we love love. I love love. If there's something I like, it's something I love. And if there's something I love, I'm going to love it hard. We got more stories than we can do anything with. I can only read some, but the deal was the best first date story would win a copy of a new book I have coming out in March called The Incredible Winston Brown, which is based here in Northwest Florida. The stories that we got about love and romance and first dates and disastrous blind dates. Oh man. Well, it's a real treat coming up on this first half. But before I do any of that, before I announce the winner of that book, I got a request in the mail from a listener named Amanda, who lives in Butte, Montana. I hope I said that right, because it looks like it's not pronounced that way. I would never be that lucky. Amanda says, remember that episode where you tap danced with your mother-in-law? Would you do that again? I loved it. Your friend Amanda. Well, Amanda, you are in luck. And first of all, I think you're wrong. It wasn't me who tap danced. It was my mother-in-law who tap danced for that episode. But because I am a good sport, I'm going to tap dance this week. I promise you this. I'm going to tap dance, and I will very, very likely pull a groin over the air. So, maestro, if you please. Look for the silver lining. Favorite song. Whenever a cloud appears in the blue, remember somewhere the sun is shining, and so the right thing to do is let it shine for you. A heart full of joy and gladness will always banish sadness and strife. So always look for the silver lining and try and find the sunny side of life. All right, here I go. Give me a second, Mr. Brown. All right, everybody back up. Everybody back up. Oh, come on. Watch out now. Look for, okay, stop. The silver lining. Whenever a cloud appears in the blue, remember somewhere the sun is shining, and so the right thing to do is let it shine for you. A heart full of joy and gladness will always banish sadness and strife. So always look for the silver lining and try and find that sunny side of life, and try and find the sunny side of life. Oh boy. Oh Lord. Well, you know your show has degenerated into oblivion once you have taken the step to reducing the quality of what you do into pure vaudeville gags, which is where we are. Well, we're going to read you a little bit of our mail. A little bit of our mail sent in to us from listeners all over this fine nation. We had nothing better to do than to tell us stories about their first dates. We asked people on Instagram to tell us stories about their first dates. And the winner, who has the best comment, who I'll read very last, will win a copy of my upcoming book, The Incredible Winston Brown. Our first message comes from Coop01 Loves Books on Instagram. Coop01 Loves Books. Oh my, Sean. My first date was in 1978, and he drove a 66 Impala muscle car. We went to Sambo's restaurant and had milkshakes and fries. That was a cheap date. He then taught me how to drive a 3 on the column and never once got upset when his car chugged and died. Although we didn't last as a couple, we have reconnected in the past few years thanks to social media. He's still as handsome as he was all those years ago, I must add. This one from Bebop 530. So on the very first date I had was in 1975. We rode around the courthouse. 35 years later, we were united. Nice steak dinner. I prefer the steak dinner. Jeanette Drew says, my very first date with my husband consisted of seeing Home Alone and having a steak dinner at a Mexican restaurant. I knew he would be my husband when he paid for our dinner and included the buy one get one free coupon. What a guy. This one comes from the Back Road Diva. Back Road Diva. Dear Sean, the first date with my husband was in April 1992. He asked me out the very first hour I stepped foot on campus at East Tennessee State University. I was there for a graduate school interview and thought to myself, who is this weird guy? You know, I bet he asks all the girls out. He doesn't even know me. So reluctantly, I accepted his invitation to dine at a meet and 3 the next day, and we've been together ever since. We will be married 27 years in September. And just for the record, I still think he's weird. Southern Made Simple. Dear Sean, I was 14, and I got the opportunity to travel to Europe with a bunch of young teenagers all over South Alabama. At some point, I apparently caught the attention of a coastal Alabama redneck, and I mean that with the utmost respect because he was a nice fella. And I agreed to meet him for a date when we returned home. With all our parents chaperoning, he took me to a freezing cold and smelly movie theater in Pensacola, Florida. He tried to kiss me in the middle of a movie called Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. A movie I prefer not to remember. His dad was sitting approximately 2 rows behind us, so the fact that he was bold enough to make that kind of move on me in front of his parents was making him lose points fast. He didn't buy me popcorn, but he did buy me a mystery meat gyro from the mall afterward. On the way home, I told myself I'd laugh about that one day and forget all about how my date didn't even buy me a popcorn or a Dr. Pepper. This is from Fred Handbag Reads. Fred Handbag Reads. Dear Sean, my wife saw me and knew that I was the guy she would marry. She asked me out first. She had her company's tickets to the Talladega 500. I remember her red sundress and getting stuck in traffic and just talking. 38 years ago, we're still going strong. A. Miss Nichols. Dear Sean, my husband and I went to see The Miracle Worker at a little community theater in Sulphur Springs, Texas. I made him go with me because I was getting extra credit for theater class. Mr. Annie Robinson. Dear Sean, my first date was when we went to see Rocky IV at the Dixie's Theater in Haleyville, Alabama. We rode in a dually truck along with my brother, his brother, and his sister, and their significant others, and another friend or two. When we were almost back to my house, he whispered. Can I kiss you? And I responded with, what? Because, well, I was such a romantic. Also, I was 13 and he was 15. We've been married for 28 years. Jess Williams, journalist. Dear Sean, my first date, prom. He was a nerd, I was a nerd. I wore braces, he stuttered. I was more awkward than stumbling on my wedding gown down the aisle, almost giving the recovering alcoholic pastor a free show. No one would ever forget that day. Mandy, 522-3. Dear Sean, my first real date. My boyfriend took me to the movies out of town and he got a speeding ticket heading there and another one on our way back. Trisha S. Scott says, Dear Sean, Peanut Festival, that was our first date. I watched the demolition derby, couldn't find the car, laughed until we cried and talked all night, and then I married him. Homeschool girls. Dear Sean, I don't have a great first date story, but my mom and dad actually do. My dad was dating my mom's sister, and it didn't work. A few years after that, my mom saw him at a drive-in. She said that he had his cigarettes rolled up in his white t-shirt and he looked so cool. He asked her to go riding around town. After dating a little over a week, he had to go to spring training for the Milwaukee Braves in Lawson, Oklahoma. He was a pitcher. They were married for 51 years until my mom died 13 years ago. Elo Sobruno. Sean, it was 1985 and I was a young teen. I had built up the nerve to ask a girl to our church's Valentine's Day banquet. She already had a date, so my parents set me up with a classmate whose mom thought I was perfect for her daughter. I had a thing about honesty over politeness, and was very awkward to boot. When we picked her up, she thanked me for asking her, and I said, well, I asked someone else, but she couldn't go. Leader of the chicken parade. Dear Sean, our first date was a blind date to Talladega NASCAR race with my entire family. He was freshly out of the Army, back from a year in Fluja. My first thought when I saw him was that I'd marry him someday. He was so nervous, he downed the Jack and Coke he had brought to the track fairly quickly after the race started. The hot sun and those spiked Coca-Colas were not a good combination. Oh, well, 3 years after that, the first of our 3 babes was born. Well, isn't that nice? He is still the most ruggedly handsome 6'4" redhead I've ever seen. He's an incredible husband, father, and provider. We are so thankful for him. When our families get together, we love to laugh about the hilarious comments from the ride home that day. South Canal. Dear Sean, we went to dinner. It was a good-looking guy who took me to the only fancy restaurant in town in Port St. Joe, Florida, called Butler's on the Bay. I was trying to be polite and not stuff the entire shrimp in my mouth, so I went to cut the shrimp, and it shot off my plate and landed on the table beside us. I was mortified, but my now husband, the good-looking boy, thought it was hilarious. And now I just eat shrimp because we've been married for 25 years. The library ladder. Dear Sean, my very first date was not until university. I was 22 and I met this great guy at a pub night. 2 days later, it was Valentine's Day, and he took me to dinner at a Greek restaurant and gave me a giant box of chocolate. We dated for 2 years after that and are still friends some 20 odd years later. He said I was the first woman he'd taken on that dinner date who didn't order a small salad, and instead of dessert, I ate a bunch of chocolates while we chatted in his car outside my house. Andrew Madden, 84. Sean, I had nervously been dropping by my now wife's on-campus job for weeks, trying to get up the nerve to ask her out. I had tickets to see Styx and REO Speedwagon at the Georgia National Fair in Perry, Georgia. Finally, I mustered the courage, and she said yes. We had a great time. Rode all the rides, ate great fair food, enjoyed the concert, and ended up talking most of the night, only to be up early the next morning to give a college tour at Georgia College in Milledgeville. As tired as we both were, we both knew it was the start of something special. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a dog later. It's still the best decision I ever made. Mentone Inn. The Mentone Inn. Dear Sean, my first date was a blind date. A double date with my best friends, her boyfriend and his brother. It's 1973. Platform shoes were the rage. Mind you, I'm 5'10", flat-footed. I wore my platform sandals, and I became 6'2". When he arrived, he was every bit of 5'5", with his cowboy boots on. Talk about awkward. So I changed into flats and went out anyway. By the way, there was not a second date. This is from Lee Pobst. Dear Sean, my very first date was in 1971. He was a basketball player and I was a cheerleader. He sat down beside me on the ride home from the game and he told me he liked me. Now, we've been married for 46 years, with lots of laughs, lots of thankful times, 2 sons, and their families complete the first date, I think. And that's letters from our listeners who were kind enough to send in their first date stories. There were so many more. I could have done this for about 7 hours. Before I get to the winning first date story, I want to say please feel free to email us at seanofthesouthshow@gmail.com, or you can visit seanofthesouthshow.com and find archived episodes dating back all the way to the first one to this one. Although I don't know why you're listening to this one. You must have terrible taste in podcasts. This next story is the clear-cut winner. Her name is Jess. Jess plus the mess is her username. And this is her first date story. Sean, I met my husband in Savannah, Georgia for our first date. 4 months after we both lost our first spouses, both to brain cancer. He lived in Oklahoma and had 3 young children, and I lived in Michigan with 4 kids under 7. A stranger from Pennsylvania followed both of our blogs and connected us. We decided to meet on neutral southern soil, where we almost got married, but didn't, out of respect for our families. And the rest is history, Sean. 10 years later, another kid, 4 moves, 2 books, career changes, and special needs. And we're still going strong. Boy, I'll tell you, if there's anything in this world that is better than love, I don't care to know what it is. the 2nd South Carolina String Band. Just beautiful. Well, this portion of our program is brought to you by Visit North Alabama, or hashtag Visit North AL. Visit the 16 North Alabama counties and make this state just above us what it is. You can visit these counties or go eat barbecue. Whatever you do, you can do it better at North Alabama. So visit northalabama.org or hashtag Visit North AL. Well, it was in the northeast part of Scotland, where the North Sea extends inland into the high mountainous country. And there's 4 counties in this area: Banff, Kincardine, and Angus, and Aberdeen. Well, this is where the first Angus cattle trace their heritage. Now, the first Angus cattle in America came when George Grant transported 4 Angus bulls from Scotland to the middle of the Kansas prairie in 1873. They were part of his dream to found an entire colony of wealthy, stock-raising British people. Except he died 5 years later, and many of the settlers at his colony in Victoria, Kansas, later returned to their homeland. And that was it. However, these 4 Angus bulls, probably originating from the Scotsman's herd over in Westertown, Scotland, a man named George Brown. These 4 bulls, which had come all the way to America, made a real impression on the entire U.S. cattle industry when 2 of George Grant's bulls were exhibited in the fall of 1873 at the Kansas City, Missouri Livestock Exposition. Some people looked at these bulls and they were disgusted. They called them freaks because their polled, naturally hornless heads and solid black color, there was nothing exceptional about them. Short horns were the dominant breed. Well, Grant was a forward thinker. He'd crossed the bulls with native Texas Longhorn cows. He produced a huge number of hornless black calves that could survive well on a winter range. These were American cows. Well, the first great herds of American Angus beef were built by purchasing stock directly from Scotland. 1,200 cattle alone were imported, mostly to the Midwest, in a period of explosive cattle growth, which would define our country from 1878 to 1883. And so, I feel a little strange talking about all that with these girls looking at me here in the field behind me. Oh, they sure are beautiful. the 2nd South Carolina String Band. Believable. Well, now my first date with Jamie Martin Dietrich, who was then Jamie Martin, took place at her parents' house. This was one of the first dates. This is the one that sticks out in my memory as our first planned date. I wasn't a very, wealthy guy. So some of my dates were more creative than not. Some of my dates involved fishing poles. Some of my dates involved long drives. These are not dates that you want to woo a girl with. So I was really pulling out the stops. We were going to do dinner and a movie, although we were going to do dinner and then watch a movie at her parents' house. And there's one very important reason for this, because VHS movies back in those days gave you an excuse to sit dangerously close to one another. So this first date was supposed to take place at her parents' house. Now, her parents had sworn a sacred vow that they would not spy on us or eavesdrop or bother us or give us any problems. They said that they would let us have the entire living room all to ourselves. Now, the reason we chose her parents' house, aside from the fact that it gave us an excuse to be in a more homey environment, was because her parents' house was the only house I knew of that had a VCR. It's true, in those days, a VHS movie was important. We used to have rental video stores. Do you remember those? Where'd they go? They disappeared a long time ago. You used to walk in there and you'd check out a videotape that was roughly the size of a cinder block in a plastic case. And you would take it home and you'd watch it. The place we rented movies was at the grocery store. The grocery store had a rental aisle. And the irony here is, my wife and I, who was not my wife at the time, did not care about movies. Not at all. We were only interested in each other. And that's easy to tell. So because this low level of interest in renting a movie, we had this kind of conversation in the video rental aisle at the Winn-Dixie that went kind of something like this. But which movie do you want? Oh, I don't know. Anything you want. Well, I don't care. I can watch anything you want to watch. No. Makes no difference to me. What do you want to see? Oh, I don't know. Whatever you want to see. Oh, no. I'm okay. I don't need to say anything. I'm happy to watch whatever you want to watch. I don't know what I want to watch. What do you want to watch? And that's how it went, okay? This is classic for young lovers. They just have not learned how to state preference yet. So we don't. We exist in this low state of self-apprehension that prevents us from ever asserting what we actually would like to do, which is probably not rent a movie at all. But we had the same basic conversation about where we were going to eat that night. That was even worse, let me tell you, because the number one question that will plague your life as someone in love is, where are you going to dinner, or what is for dinner? If you're married, it's what's for dinner. Well, back then we could not settle on it that night. We rented some movie that we don't even remember what it was. We weren't even paying attention to it. And all of a sudden, we're having to figure out where we're gonna eat. And because we couldn't settle on a place, here's what we did. We drove through town 3 separate times. We drove from Walton County to Destin, from Destin to Fort Walton, from Fort Walton to Mary Esther. We turned around. We went from Mary Esther to Fort Walton, all the way back to Destin, all the way back to Walton County. Then we turned around and did it all again. After 2 hours of looking for places and never once stating personal preference, we simply turned around and drove back to her parents' house on Hideaway Bay Drive with empty bellies and low blood sugar. This is the torture of the first date. This is the torture of young love. All you out there listening who are dreaming one day of falling in love, it's an affliction. Love is a wonderful, gentle, affliction, but it's an illness nonetheless. Although it is an illness you will experience willingly. We arrived at her parents' house, and her mom and dad immediately evacuated the living room, good on their promise, because they said we could have complete privacy, and so whoosh, they were gone. We were downstairs, and I went up to the VCR with the blinking 12 o'clock numbers, and she sat on the sofa and popped the huge video cassette in, and I want to tell you, our first date night went from bad to worse because the movie that we had inadvertently rented without paying attention was the foulest movie you had ever known. I can't even tell you what it was on this podcast. We could not watch it. 5 minutes into the film, the movie had become nothing but grotesque scenes involving heavy breathing. These were scenes that would have given your preacher a major cardiac event. It was god-awful. Imagine my horror. I leapt off the sofa. I popped the stop button. I ejected the tape, and the screen went to static, and I was humiliated. Oh, I was totally humiliated. And I looked over there at this lovely young woman, and she said, "What did we rent? Oh my word, what did we rent?" And I said, "I don't know, you picked it out." Her face was in her hands, and her cheeks were red. And Lord, I felt so ridiculous that it happened. It started in my belly, just beneath my belly button, and it crept up through my ribs and my esophagus, and I began to laugh. And then we both began to laugh without control. Namely, I think we were laughing because there was a lot of angst and tension in the room that just needed to be released. Have you ever been to a big formal event or a very uptight, thing, and someone says one little thing that's funny and the whole room laughs, like a graduation maybe or a wedding? And some guy gets up and he just pops one little clever remark and everybody just laughs, and you can feel that the whole audience wanted to laugh. They wanted that tension released. Well, it was like that. We started laughing until we were crying. And I'm telling you, all these years later, I think to myself, I'm so glad that movie was horrible, because we didn't care about movies. We just wanted to sit real close on that sofa. So, with the movie off, and our stomachs growling, and our ribs aching from laughter, and our cheeks sore, we were smiling. We started to talk. And this is really what we should have been doing all night long, because we're good conversationalists, my wife and I. In fact, I would venture to say it's one of the things we do best is have a conversation. And conversations between young lovers are the most magnificent things you will ever hear. These are repartees that are so idealistic, so juvenile, so hopeful, so nonsensical and whimsical, so insightful and brilliant in some ways, that they'll hurt your heart. I'll never forget it. She said, "Do you like kids?" I said, "Like them. I love them. I eat 2 for breakfast every morning." She said, "Be serious. Boys or girls?" Well, I've always wanted to have a daughter. I've always wanted to have a little girl so I could spoil her. I've always wanted a daddy's girl, I guess. Jamie smiled and she said, "Well, if I had a daughter, I think I'd name her Rose." Rose is a nice name, I said, but I always thought I'd name my first daughter Benny. And Jamie said, "Benny? For a girl?" "Sure. You can name a girl Benny. I knew a chick named Benny once. She taught me everything I know about Ford carburetors. Great gal." "Well, I'm not naming our daughter Benny." "Our daughter?" I said, and this was followed by silence. And then we talked about Sunday school. Would we let our daughter go to Sunday school at a Baptist church where we went? Or, I mean, if she did that, that would mean that Benny would have to sit beneath the tutelage of Miss Devons, who everybody knew was crazier than a sprayed roach. I'm telling you, Miss Devons once told the Sunday school second grade class that Jesus was coming back next Friday, and he would condemn any child who had not memorized a scripture verse from their quarterly. And that week there were 9 reported bedwettings. You don't want to be messing around with Miss Devons. I wouldn't want to sit underneath the instruction of Miss Devons. But, said the young woman on the sofa next to me, of course my child would go to Sunday school. Everyone needs Sunday school. I said, with Miss Devons? Lord, that woman's 8 bricks shy of a load. There'd be no way I'd let old Benny sit in that class. Well, didn't you go to Sunday school? Oh, sure I did. But that was different. My Sunday school teacher never made me pee the bed. I didn't need any help in that department. Well, I definitely want our daughter in Sunday school. I think it's important. And there it was again. Our daughter. Also, I noticed I had scooted a lot closer to her, and she had scooted closer to me. Not so much like lovers, but more like friends. But not so much like friends, but more like lovers. Like 2 people who were so comfortable with each other that they didn't know how to be apart or want to. Also, my cheeks were getting hot, and I'm pretty sure I couldn't breathe. And she said to me, "You'd make a good dad." Admittedly, this is something I'm not sure about. And I told her as much. I said, I don't know. I didn't really have a good example. And I'm afraid I screw up a child's life. Well, but listen, I said, you'd make a terrific mother. She said, oh, I don't know about that. And then she scooted closer. And she put her arm through mine and rested her head on my shoulder. And I could smell the intoxicating aroma of her shampoo. She said nothing, and neither did I, and I thought to myself, I could live in this moment. I could live right here. You could suspend my consciousness, and I could smile 1,000 smiles until I die from it, right here. The television was above us. It was on mute, and the white static was hissing. The VCR had a blinking 12 o'clock number. No one ever sets the time on the VCR. Her eyes were closed. And I was thinking about what I would do with this woman if she ever gave me her hand. If she ever became somebody who would agree to grow old with me. And we just sat there in that stillness and watched nothing. Quiet. Man never knows what he's getting into. He never knows exactly what kind of road his life is about to take. It could take a sharp right tomorrow, day after tomorrow. You could wake up tomorrow and everything could be different. I think about these things, especially in moments of extreme emotional contemplation, which is what love is. You contemplate things more than you normally would. You think about the future. You never think about the future until you have something to lose, and love always gives you something to lose. Oh, but it's antiseptic, and it's a drug, a painkiller, love. It's medicine for the soul, and it's seen in many different kinds of forms. It's seen in many different kinds of successes and failures. And it's also seen in daily life. Love is like DNA. I don't mean to get all hokey spooky here, but in the neonatal ICU, they have women, mostly women, who volunteer to hold babies who were born prematurely. Why? Because orphanages have 40% mortality rates. 40%, because they don't get any affection or love. Now, if love can keep a child alive, if love can transform the body of a child from a dying thing into a growing thing, if love can save someone's life simply through means of touch and heart communication, nothing to do with your words, nothing to do with your big cow eyes, nothing to do with what you say and what you promise, but it's all about communication on some unseen level. Now, if love can do that for a child, what do you think it can do for an adult? Do you think you change through childhood and all of a sudden you don't need what you used to need? Don't be silly. Well, we sat there in that beautiful stillness. She was my, in manner of speaking, my neonatal nurse. She was restoring me to better health. We were interrupted by a large crash behind the sofa, a big old boom. And the very next thing I heard was a hoarse whisper, and it said, "Did he kiss her yet?" And then I heard, "Hush, woman, I can't see a thing with your head in my way." And well, that's when I met my future in-laws. That's our show for you tonight. That's our show coming to you live via the podcast airwaves in a cattle pasture in northwest Florida where the old girls had a little something to say tonight. They wanted to steal the show. Special thanks to William Buchanan, Jake Howard, and Dan DeLeon. Also, want to say thanks to our special guest, the 2nd South Carolina String Band, who will be joining us in a few weeks for a special episode on Mark Twain's hometown in Hannibal, Missouri. You don't want to miss that. Thank you to Aaron Peters on the biscuit box fiddle and Silvio Santamori on the skins. And to the farmer, Jody Frost, for letting us do this episode on his land. If you feel like emailing us this week, please feel free to do so. It's SeanOfTheSouthShow@gmail.com, or you can reach us at SeanOfTheSouthShow.com, where you can find a contact form in there. You can also find archived episodes dating all the way back to our very first episode, to this one you just heard. I hope you do send us a little something about yourself, because we love to hear from you, especially because it makes so much of a difference today to talk to somebody and feel like you got a friend. And believe me, you do have a friend right here. I hope you have a wonderful week this week, and if you don't, I hope you still try. Adios.